Good evening and welcome to the Health and Housing Emergency rally to kick off the summit, which is going on tomorrow, put on by Homes for All. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm the chair of Southwark Defend Council Housing and the coordinator of the Up the Elephant campaign. I should say one of the coordinators. My name's Tanya Murat. We are living through a housing and health emergency. On the one hand, the richest 1% have amassed almost a quarter of all UK household wealth and have done very well out of the pandemic. On the other hand, every 8 minutes, a child becomes homeless. Housing insecurity affects nearly 10 million people in Britain. Despite the partial eviction ban, there are huge levels of deprivation. People can't pay their rent and pay for food at the same time. People will have seen longer and longer lines of people at food banks in every town of this country, the 6th richest nation on earth. And things are set to get worse if the government gets away with scrapping the £20 uplift in universal credit. Homes for All is an alliance of tenants, trade unionists and housing campaigners. We've called this rally and the summit tomorrow to talk about what actions we need to take to change that story. We'll be hearing from people fighting back in this country and in others. We'll be taking action to challenge governments and landlords, showing that another world is possible. We're very pleased to be joined by key activists in the housing movement, either by pre-recorded video for this occasion or in person. On the call tonight with us are Sheena McDade from the NIPSA Trade Union North of Ireland, Anita Long, who's a community campaigner in housing from the Bronx in the USA, in New York, John Glackin from Streets Kitchen, and Izzy Smythman, who's a student rent striker. And we're also delighted to show some short videos from Ken Loach, the filmmaker, Kevin Courtney, the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, Ed Defan from Grenfell United, and there's a short presentation from Will Martin from the UK Cladding Action campaign, and a video from Leeds Save Our Homes, S26. So do invite others to join us here. Share this on social media. Please say hello on the chat and post your comments. If you're part of a campaign, do make sure that you post the link in the chat, as there will be people out there who are keen to get involved. There will be a chance to raise questions and get involved in planning action in the summit workshops tomorrow. The details of how to join the summit will be posted in the chat and in the comments, and I'll run through the workshops for you after we've heard from our guests. I hope to be able to squeeze in a few questions and comments for our guests tonight, but if I don't manage to read out your comment, the opening session of the summit tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. will include some time for questions and contributions from the floor. So I really hope you can join us there. To start with Grenfell, because that's really been in the news very much lately. The inquiry has heard damning revelations about the whole system of regulation works for the benefit of corporate profits rather than for safety. We'll be hearing from UK Cladding Action, people who've been hit by the cladding scandal. Now, they've won a significant victory in the form of a £5 billion payout for cladding removal from high-rise blocks. Of course, this isn't enough and it doesn't protect all leaseholders. But to begin at the beginning, I'm pleased to introduce a video by Ed Defan from Grenfell United. This is where this scandal began. So, Dave.
My name's Edward Daffan. I'm a committee member at Grenfell United. Grenfell United are determined to obtain three things: truth, justice and change. With regards to truth, we've been frustrated by the fact that the inquiry will restart virtually, i.e. there will be no one giving evidence in public. And although that is so hard for us to take with the corporate core participants. It is absolutely unbearable for us to think that RBKC, the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and their landlord, the KCTMO, may give their evidence via a computer screen, i.e. in the comfort of their own homes with their slippers on their sofas into a computer screen. Envisage change to come through a number of different areas, and the complete lack of the government's ability to address the current cladding crisis fills us with horror. Although we can understand the frustration and the pain that leaseholders are going through, living in buildings that they can't remortgage and they can't move on from, I think we share with them probably a little bit deeper the fact that they are living in buildings that are still covered in flammable cladding, and gives a prospect of them experiencing the same absolutely devastating consequences that we experienced in Grenfell. Grenfell 2 will happen. There will be another fire. It may not be in London, it may not even be in the UK, it may be somewhere else in the world. But as long as there is this flammable cladding on the outside of buildings, they are not safe. And in 3.5, nearly 4 years, the government have done not nearly enough to remove this cladding from the building. The government need to take firm action, take responsibility, remove the cladding and make homes safe. We were told quite early on by Sir Martin Moore-Bick that the public inquiry would not be addressing the kind of cultural issues experienced in social housing. So we've had to rely on the white paper on social housing, which we hope is going to be put before Parliament after the next Queen's speech. Intrinsic to this, for Grenfell United, there are 3 elements. They are primarily, although not exclusively, the role of the regulator for social housing, the role of the ombudsman, and what we would see as a professionalisation of social housing. So Grenfell United were asking for a lot of things that we didn't get in this white paper. We didn't want the same regulator in place. We wanted a different body. We didn't want the ombudsman to deal with complaints, but we didn't win those battles. So we're faced with the same regulator and the same ombudsman. But we do believe there is still something to play for. This white paper could pan out one of 2 ways. It could either deliver a measure of change, or it could be a complete and utter failure. The regulator for social housing needs to be a robust, well-funded body that sees the needs and the complaints of residents as their foremost duty. The ombudsman, who we didn't want to oversee the complaint process, needs to be able to respond to residents' complaints in a way that goes far beyond anything that has happened before. And there needs to be a before Grenfell and an after Grenfell, i.e. that people who live in social housing can notice categorically that things were this way before 2017, and since Grenfell they are now this way. And the complaints process needs to be one of those avenues, and people need to not feel that the only way they can get a complaint addressed now is to put a photograph on Twitter and hope that their landlord picks it up. And finally, I'd like to talk about the Phase 1 recommendations. Grenfell United are absolutely determined that the recommendations made by Sir Martin Moore-Bick turn into reality. And at the moment, there has been far too slow a response by the government. We were absolutely horrified to find out that a small cabal of government advisors, industry insiders had come together recently to try and water down the government's response to disabled residents living in high-rise blocks. And we're horrified that the government think that it's okay to somehow try and manipulate the recommendations made by Sir Martin Moore-Bick. So thank you for inviting me to come and speak to you today. Just to reiterate, truth, justice and change are the 3 things that Grenfell United are fighting for as we move forward. And we appreciate your support in helping us achieve that.
And I'm sure we're all very grateful for Ed for taking the time to speak to us. For those that are interested in Grenfell and cladding, there will be a workshop tomorrow, which is supported by Moira Samuels from one of the Grenfell campaigners. And It's absolutely, I mean, there are no words for how appallingly the survivors have been treated, and the fact that there's still no justice years after. There's a lot of comments, and there's a few questions in the chat, so I'm just going to read out a couple. Greetings from Save Our Homes LS26. We're going to hear from them later. Greetings from Eviction Resistance Camping, Southend. Solidarity from Newham. Leah says this is a fight for ordinary people. Solidarity from Islington Housing Action. Hi everyone, says Sharon. Greetings from RBKC leaseholders. Angie says, how are leaseholders managing to pay increased costs due to cladding issues? I think the answer is financial ruin for many of them, Angie. NASA says solidarity from Tottenham. I'll read out a few more afterwards, but I'm going to go to you, Anita. First of all, thanks ever so much for joining us from New York. You've been part of a campaign to stop evictions in New York, where Governor Cuomo has introduced what's known as a fake eviction moratorium. Now, we're quite familiar with those. What can you tell us about that, and what can you tell us about your campaign?
Thank you. My name is Anita Long, and I belong with CASA. I'm a volunteer leader, and CASA stands for Community Action for a Safe Apartment. And along, we are in membership with Housing Justice for All, which is a statewide for New York campaign. And we are united in the belief that housing is a human right and that no person should live in fear of an eviction, and that we can end the homeless crisis within our state. Since the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, CASA and its coalition allies have been united in demanding that Governor Cuomo and our elected protect all New Yorkers hurting in this pandemic. Our government keep issuing moratoriums, eviction moratoriums that last for about 2 to 3 months, and not understanding that people are still living in fear month after month after month, trying to figure out how they're going to pay their rent. And we need our government to make sure that everyone have a safe, affordable home and no one gets evicted and forced into homelessness. And we also have to keep in mind that even before COVID, millions were struggling to afford a decent place to live. And this pandemic has only made the housing crisis even worse. We understand that evictions are violent. Evictions impacts everyone's health. Eviction is a public health crisis which is affecting our communities. People who are threatened with eviction, even before they lose their home, are more likely to report poor health, high blood pressure, depression, anxiety, and psychological distress. Evictions often leads to residential instability, forcing people to move into poor quality housing, move into overcrowding conditions, and into homelessness, all of which is associated with negative health among adults and the children. And we do realize that a stable home is the foundation for good health. When people are in homes that they can afford in the neighborhoods in which they desire to live, they are healthy. All people have a right to a safe, decent, affordable home. And when they have one, we all benefit for healthier, thriving communities. Our government in New York, that's Governor Cuomo and the electeds, keep issuing different types of legislators which they feel would benefit us. We're pushing back because we're telling them what we need. One, universal eviction moratorium, meaning no evictions for anyone during the duration of the state of emergency and up to a year after this pandemic ends. Two, cancel the rent for tenants and cancel mortgage for small homeowners from the period of March 7th, 2020 through the end of the crisis. That means when the emergency is lifted, plus 90 days, therefore no debt is owed. And we're also requesting that the Housing Access Voucher Program that gives homeless New Yorkers an immediate pathway out of dangerous shelters, off the streets, and out of temporary rooms, hotel rooms during this global pandemic. We, because of the COVID-19, we seen that the low income earners in the communities, the Black and Brown communities, were and are still now forced to face economic hardship due to forced joblessness, forced cut in salaries, forced cuts in government resources, and the possibility of forced evictions leading to homelessness. When the COVID-19 pandemic began, it was our state government who asked all the New Yorkers to protect each other by staying at home. Businesses were shuttered by our government by executive orders. We followed this directive, and now our electeds, including the governor, has failed to keep us in our homes. And this is what we're fighting for. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anita. It's a real inspiration to hear from you. Somebody commented on what you were saying. Oh, I lost him now. Yes. So Outreach Joe says solidarity, housing and affordability should be an inalienable right. Homelessness in this country in this century are a stain. Housing for profit is an horrific extortion. And I have to agree with that. Let's go to our next presentation from Will Martin of UK Cladding Action Campaign.
Thank you very much for having me along to present. I thought I'd just give you a very quick overview about who we are, what our aims are, and where the campaign is currently at. So who are we? Well, we formed in 2019, 3 leaseholders affected by the cladding and fire safety scandal. And really, we had our main objective was to unite leaseholders across the country and bring them together to lobby government and press for change and hold those responsible to account. Together with Manchester Gladiators and Inside Housing magazine, we launched the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign. And the campaign has a whole range of asks, but the underlying principle of the campaign is a firmly held belief that innocent leaseholders shouldn't be held to account for the mistakes of others in the past. So, what's the problem? You've probably seen in the news lots about cladding and particularly given last week's announcement, but for those of you who don't know, following the Grenfell tragedy, many buildings were tested and deemed to have combustible materials on their exterior, and along with that, several other problems have been discovered. And it's estimated that around 11 million people are affected in some way, shape or form by the cladding scandal and building safety scandal. And of course, those people can't sell their homes, they can't remortgage, they can't start a family and move to a bigger home, they're essentially trapped. And you've got the remediation works that need doing. By that I mean the removal of these dangerous materials, and that often costs millions of pounds. And then in the interim of time, you've got the interim costs. And by that I mean things like waking watch costs, 24-hour patrols of the building. They can cost up to £15,000 a week. You've got insurance hikes of 1,300% in some places. And these are costs that are being faced by leaseholders. And I think it's really, really important to say that despite our name, it's not just about cladding anymore. The cladding is being removed and a whole plethora of other problems are being discovered. And currently, there is no government funding for these problems, and they can be, in some cases, just as expensive to remediate as the cladding themselves. And of course, until they are remediated, the building cannot be sold, it's unsellable, it's still valued at zero, and the misery for millions of leaseholders continues on. The government stance has always been that leaseholders shouldn't have to pay for these works, but the fact of the matter is we are paying. Waking watch costs, as I've said, are being paid. Insurance hikes are being paid, and currently, like I said, there's no current funding for anything other than cladding. And I should say that buildings that are under 80 metres that are being funded for the cladding, leaseholders have been introduced with a loan scheme, which does contradict what government have always said that leaseholders shouldn't have to pay. So what's the impact of all this? Well, you've got the mental health impact. 23% of people telling us that their mental health, 23% of people, telling us that they've considered suicide or self-harm. 9 out of 10 people telling us that their mental health has deteriorated. You can't communicate to someone who doesn't live in one of these buildings just how much of an impact it has on your mental health and, the sleepless nights that are had in these buildings. And then, of course, you've got the financial impacts. Service charges going up by over 100%. Leaseholders are facing huge costs, tens of thousands of pounds worth of remediation costs are landing on their doorstep, and they're just totally unaffordable. So, what's the progress so far? Well, there has been some progress since Grenfell, but it's been too little and too late. There hasn't been enough done to remediate these buildings. We're 3.5 years on from Grenfell, and there are still so many buildings with dangerous cladding or other fire safety defects, and cladding that is exactly the same as Grenfell. The funding today needs, as I said, a wider scope. We've got lots and lots of problems that just isn't covered by the current funds, and the size of that funding needs to be increased. The government themselves have said that £15 billion is an estimate of how much is needed to remediate this problem and make this problem go away, and they've only released a third of that funding. So there's a long, long way to go, and until all defects in these buildings are fixed, these buildings will remain unsafe and continue to have an impact on the mental health and financial aspects of people's well-being. So moving forward, where are we headed? So we have always said that we're not expecting taxpayers to put more money into the pot to fix the problem. We believe firmly that the polluter should pay, and that's why we strongly support the Leasehold Knowledge Partnership proposal. That proposal is a solution that would see taxpayers and leaseholders not held to account for the mistakes of others. So we're firmly in support of that. Next week we've got the Fire Safety Bill, which is we've worked with 2 Tory MPs to put together an amendment which would seek to ban the passing on of historic remediation costs to leaseholders. So we'll be looking forward to that. Then there's the budget coming up and several other things in the pipeline for the campaign. We're always fundraising. We're trying to really push the campaign in the media, and that's ongoing. It's really important to keep this issue in the public domain. I think a lot of people think that the cladding scandal is over, given last week's announcement, and I would say far from it. And that's just about it, really. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for having me along. I would say a final call out for support. If anyone wants to volunteer, anyone has any ideas about the campaign, please drop us an email, contact us on Twitter. If you're feeling generous, head over to our donation site. We'd really appreciate your help. We really are crying out for help, volunteer-wise, and we're always up for hearing new ideas about how we can tackle scandal moving forward. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much for that, Will, from UK Cladding Action Campaign. There's plenty of comments about cladding in the chat in both YouTube and Facebook. So I think it was Linda that talked about there being that councils are very slow to remove the cladding, but very quick to demand if you have rent arrears. Yes, there you go. Linda Martin, thank you very much for that comment. And Anita, by the way, Sharon thanks you. A very interesting report on the housing crisis in the US. I can see that over 100 people are now watching on YouTube. Let's go to our next speaker, who is Sheena McDade from the NIPSA Trade Union, North of Ireland. Sheena, now, as Defend Council Housing, the stock transfer issue is very close to our hearts. It seems that you've had a very vibrant housing campaign in the north of Ireland. You've even stopped stock transfer in some places. And there's an ongoing campaign about the Northern Ireland Executive. What lessons are there for us? And what have you been up to?
Hello, thank you, Tanya, for that introduction there. As you pointed out, I'm Sheena McDade and I'm a representative for NIPSA, which is the largest trade union based in the north of Ireland. NIPSA is a trade union for employees of the Northern Ireland Housing Executive, traditionally. Over the last number of years, the Housing Executive has faced various threats. Proposals have ranged from breaking up of the Housing Executive, turning it into housing associations, and they attempted small-scale stock transfer schemes that have ran until fairly recently. In response to this, we as a trade union initiated many grassroots housing campaigns right across the north, and most notably in Ballyclare and Ballymena. NIPSA, alongside tenants and housing activists, campaigned and lobbied hard, and we ensured we had the right research, which we carried out along with Stuart Smith. And quite a lot of people maybe watching this would have been already familiar with the stock transfers, especially in England, Scotland, Wales. So the input and contribution we had from our own tenants here in the north was phenomenal, and it was very much a partnership of what we did together. Both of these campaigns were hugely successful and unique. We as a union didn't have an employment stake in it as such. It was purely the campaign to stop the privatisation, which is essentially what it is, of public or true social housing. It was just done solely for the education of the tenants who would be affected this time and possibly the next time. We highlighted the detrimental impact stock transfers have on tenants' rights, the hikes in the rent charges that they would face after this, and essentially reducing somebody's home down to a monetary value. And that is just not something we could ever support. Both Ballyclare and Ballymena overwhelmingly rejected the stock transfer programme, and it was indefinitely suspended. In recent months, the Department for Communities Minister here in Northern Ireland has laid out plans to revitalise the Housing Executive, following on probably from the small-scale stock transfers. Since they failed, what could they do next? So what we've been told is it's going to be a revitalisation of the Housing Executive, which the Minister proposes to take the Housing Executive as we know it now and reform it into either a mutual or a cooperative model, which is the very antithesis of the Housing Executive and why it was formed in the first place. And you'll be aware of its background and how it was born out of the civil rights movement. It would take a hugely valuable public sector organisation and place it firmly in the private sector. Again, this is totally unacceptable to us as a trade union, to our tenants who've already demonstrated this by rejecting the stock transfers, and I'm sure society would reject it too, considering what we have in the Housing Executive, what it means and what it has meant in the past and what it could mean in the future. The Housing Executive is now 50 years old, and it must stay firmly in the public sector, in the hands of the public, be properly funded, retain its governance and accountability. Over the last number of years, there's been various challenges and attempts to continually come up with various other models and reinventions of the Housing Executive when we already have a bespoke solution that fits us, and that is the Northern Ireland Housing Executive.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you, Sheena. Winnie Mulholland says Sheena's done great work with the campaign to save the housing executive homes. If Winnie knows about that campaign, if she could post details in the comments, then that would be fantastic. And I would urge anyone who's part of any campaign to put your links there in the comments as well. Going back to the issue of cladding, Irene Henson says the government have whitewashed the problem of cladding and action needs to be taken to hold them to account. All homes with unsafe cladding should have the cladding removed free of charge to tenants and leaseholders, regardless of the height of the building, she says. Solidarity. I absolutely agree with those sentiments. We can go to a video now. Kevin Courtney, he's the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, always a strong supporter of the Homes for All campaign. Let's see what Kevin's got to say.
Hello, my name's Kevin Courtney and I'm the Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, and I'm sending greetings to this emergency rally around health and housing. Defend Council Housing has, on a couple of times in recent years, held its AGM in our headquarters building, Hamilton House, in the middle of London, and we hope to see you there again physically in the not too distant future. Our country, and indeed the whole world, is going through a terrible situation with this pandemic. There's an act of God in the virus, but we also see a mismanagement by human governments around it, and we all have to reflect on how to do these things better. Now, COVID has thrown new lights on many pre-existing problems. We have children up and down this country trying to learn from home, teachers trying to teach them at home. And the new light that is thrown on the fact that some children simply don't have laptops or don't have broadband. But more importantly, in some ways, our members seeing children who are trying to access lessons in a bedroom shared with other children where there's no space, sometimes where the children live go to sleep in the living room, where there is no space at all for them to get on with their work. That's new light thrown on the housing problem. The increased mortality in some communities, which is clearly not linked to genetic variation between human groups, but linked to the crowded nature of accommodation and the increased transmission when overcrowding in housing takes place. So we know that COVID is throwing light not on new situations, but on existing situations. And we now all have to reach out and say those have to be addressed. Every child, every adult needs good quality accommodation, whether through house ownership or house renting. We need much better for many people in our society than we currently have. These are trades union issues as well as tenants issues. The NEU has many members, young members across London and in the rest of the country, living in crowded accommodation themselves, unable to get a foot on the housing market, unable to even keep pace with the rents that are being charged. So these issues are trades union issues. They're professional issues for us as teachers and educators when you see children unable to learn at home, and they are clearly now public health issues. I wish you the very best of luck with this conference. Let's hope that we can come together, tenants, trades unionists, across the whole of this country to press the case that we want to build back better. Every politician says that, but we mean it, and we know that that means an improvement in housing stock for the vast majority of council tenants and for very many children in our country who do not have access to what they need at home. Thanks very much for listening. I hope your conference goes very well.
Okay, so that was Kevin Courtney from the NEU. Fantastic to hear from Kevin, and as he says, a real shame that we can't actually meet physically in the NEU building this year, but we very much hope to be back there in future. Something he mentions about housing insecurity is talked about by Jeanette Walsh in the comments. She says, my daughter has been under threat of Section 21 eviction for over a year. Moving the moratorium for a month at a time is not the solution. That is certainly true of affecting thousands and thousands of people who are living day to day in that housing insecurity. I think we've lost John Glackin from Streets Kitchen. He was here at the beginning, but his connection looked rather flaky at that time when he joined. I hope that we're going to get him back. But in the meantime, if we, Dave, go to the video from Leeds Save Our Homes LS26, I'd really like to hear from them.
All my neighbours are my friends. We all look out for each other.
I moved here about 13 years ago.
Don't want to leave this place, don't want to leave this community, don't want to leave my friends and my neighbours.
Let us stay in our lovely homes and community.
I would like to ask Pemberstones how they think 60 families can find somewhere else to live.
The turmoil you have created in all our lives is horrendous. It's just a money thing.
Moving away from friends, neighbours, it just absolutely fills me with dread.
Virtually everybody I speak to have suffering from physical or mental health because of the threat of losing their home.
I'm just at the end of my tether with worry, and I don't know what to do.
These properties behind me are among the last of their kind. You can see over here the type of more recent development.
They were built for miners in the 1950s, but now the company which owns them, Pemberstone, wants to knock them down to build more modern homes.
The government inspector took about 2 months or so, 3 months to come to a decision, and I couldn't believe he came down on the side of Pemberstone.
How can they sleep at night knowing they're going to evict 150 people in the middle of a pandemic when they know that social housing in the city is virtually non-existent?
These are affordable properties and there is nothing else affordable in this area.
It would place a huge financial burden on us. We're not high earners.
Where do we go?
I'm determined that we're all going to beat them again.
Well, that was a bit of a roller coaster. So great misery followed by yes, but we're fighting and we're getting somewhere, which is really what we love to see here in the housing movement. I think there's over 100 people now watching on Facebook as well. And I would urge people to, if you do have any questions, it looks like we are going to have time to come back to the people on the panel for their comments. So yeah, get those questions in the comments. Just on Kevin Courtney, Jane Shallis said on YouTube, as an NEU member, I feel proud to be a member of the union with a general secretary who has such a good political position, but more importantly, a union that doesn't just talk but acts. And I think we can agree that they certainly brought the government to heel over the forced reopening of schools. Not that schools were closed, of course, for some pupils, but it wasn't certainly wasn't the safe thing to do at that point. And the NEU certainly ensured that pupils and staff were kept safe. Solidarity to all on this rally from Harlow Trades Council and Harlow Defend Council Housing. Mick Patrick says this is the effect of 30 years of deregulation and cuts. I think he's talking about the Leeds campaign there and the housing under threat there. Newham, Stand Up to Racism, says housing is a trade union issue. We must make the connection stronger. And Leah Levan, solidarity to you, Leah, councillor in a ward where 60% of homes are privately rented and Section 21 evictions is the biggest single problem. People need genuine, secure, affordable homes, yet that is considered unattainable. Quite right, Leah. It certainly is attainable when you think about how much wealth this country has and how few hands that wealth is concentrated in. So I'm going to go to Izzy now. Izzy Smythman, you are a student rent striker and blazed a trail you know, across so many different platforms when you helped to lead the Manchester University rent strike and occupation. Since then, seems like a few months back now, the rent strikes have spread. Is this a new movement, Izzy? And what is going on in universities right now?
Thank you, and thanks for organising this event. I don't really know how to follow such a emotional video. Yeah, I would say it's a new movement in that it's a very powerful movement, but at the same time, students have been kind of fighting for their rights since day one. We're currently seeing the biggest wave of student rent strikes across the country, with over 55 universities now holding rent strikes. And I think it's quite obvious how we got here. We were brought back to uni and brought onto campus in September under false pretenses that we would be safe, that we would have a mixture of blended and online learning, that there was a reason for us to come onto campus. Whereas when we got here, it's pretty obvious that the reason they wanted us here was that we'd be paying rent. At my university, pretty much everyone on my campus got COVID. I don't really know any flat that didn't have at least 1 or 2 positive COVID tests, meaning we were all pretty much forced into isolation with people we didn't know, first time living away from homes, which obviously was very damaging to students' mental and physical health as well. Young people are affected less, but they are still affected, and I know people suffering from long COVID now from that. And on top of that, students were then blamed for this crisis and faced with a complete lack of support from the universities. And at the same time, the standards of accommodation were completely poor. We had floodings, rodent infestations, lack of hot water, lack of heating, lack of Wi-Fi. And the university didn't even give us support in terms of food boxes. We were simply told to go to the shops if we couldn't arrange delivery, even though we were COVID positive, which is obviously extremely definitely unsafe and illegal. On top of this, we were also paying increased rent on top of last year for way less facilities. We didn't have access to libraries or communal spaces that we were promised. All my lectures have been online. I haven't stepped foot in a university building, and this isn't a new problem. Universities have been run like businesses for the last 10, 20 years. Our Vice Chancellor, Nancy Rothwell, is on over £260,000, whilst cleaners and the poorest, the lower staff members aren't being treated with the same rewards as she is. We have complete solidarity with staff here at Manchester University, cleaners who are being sent into COVID positive flats, and university lecturers who are being kind of lauded with voluntary severance. The mental health among students in the first couple months of term were absolutely awful. Manchester, we had a death of a student on campus, and in response, the university put up fences around our buildings, making us feel extremely enclosed. So from this, we decided to rent strike, we decided to protest, but the university ignored a lot of this. We had large protests, we had hundreds of students withholding their rent. So in November, we decided to occupy a building on the university campus, and we occupied that for 2 weeks, and managed to win the biggest rent strike in UK student history, which was obviously an amazing feat, and it set off a lot of other rent strikes around the country. As I said, now we have, I think, over 55 universities on rent strike, sort of standing up and fighting back. But at the same time, it's not improved entirely. At the moment, we have a lot of police on campus here in Manchester. I'm not sure if people have heard, but every weekend they're coming, they're entering students' flats to make sure people aren't socialising. Even flats with 8, 9 people are being given £800 fines and stuff. So we continue to rent strike, and we continue to encourage students to rent strike. So as it's a lot bigger than just Manchester, it's about the kind of very way that universities are run, and that students in halls are run. As I said, things haven't improved that much. I'm currently hotspotting this off my phone's data because we have no Wi-Fi at the moment. And I sent a complaint in 2 days ago about that. I haven't heard anything. My data will run out if I have to do my lectures next week again on hotspotting. I don't know how that's going to work. I had a cold shower this morning because we've got no heating in our block, and hopefully that'll be fixed soon, but we don't really know. So yeah, we're calling for more rent strikes, we're calling for more protests and more people standing up against the university. At Manchester, we've also started a campaign, a student referendum for a vote of no confidence in Nancy Rothwell, our Vice Chancellor, and the senior leadership of the university. Students aren't going to stand for this anymore. And yeah, solidarity with all the other sort of housing campaigns and housing actions. We're lucky enough as students that we're in a relatively safe position to rent strike, as mass evictions aren't super likely for us. But yeah, solidarity to everyone else as well.
That's brilliant, Izzy. Thank you ever so much. MP says, well done, Izzy. Angie Williams says, solidarity and support Izzy as well. It's a inspiring campaign and so long lasting. We expect to see more great things. We've got the last video from Ken Loach. There is a question in the chat about George Clark, which people might want to come back on. What do we think about his campaign for more council housing? I think it's really good, actually. But let's see the last video. This is Ken Loach, and as ever, Ken's a great supporter of our housing campaign and a great supporter of social justice everywhere.
This is a short message to say I hope this coming conference on housing and health is a great success, and urge everyone who can to be there. Everyone who comes will know the crises that we have after the pandemic. This has exposed the problems of the health service with great clarity. Not only the underfunding, not only the cuts to hospital beds, the lack of trained staff, and also the privatisation that has caused insecurity at work, lower services, and all the consequences of the gig economy for those who take part. And we also know the problems with housing and with the increased danger of evictions as the recession bites after the pandemic. Families are facing evictions this winter and the coming spring, the coming months. So it's very important that the conference is a success and it leads to demands and find a political path to action. And thinking of the demands, I want to remember the slogan from 1968, be realistic, demand the impossible. Well, it may seem impossible, but in the end we have to have strategic aims that will meet the situation. And I suggest they are these. It's a health service that's not only fully funded, but where privatisation and all outsourcing ends, and that everyone has a union contract, and that everyone has secure work and good working conditions, so that the people can be served with a proper, reliable health service, ready for whatever emergencies may arise. And for housing, council housing, yes, but not outsourced to private builders, direct labour, again with everyone with union contracts, that it works with the best architects, the best skilled craftsmen, and again, no privatised outsourcing. May seem impossible, but let's at least know what our aims are, and then find a political path that we think is realistic to begin to make inroads into those demands. Big task, big conference. Hope it's a success. Best wishes, Ken.
Well, thanks ever so much, Ken. Always great words from the greatest filmmaker alive, in my view. Okay. Got a question here for Anita from Morag. Given the restrictions of COVID-19 and Trump, how are local community housing groups mobilising to put pressure on Biden and local councillors? And then some more solidarity for Izzy. You're spot on, says Andrea Gilbert. Unis are like property. Mick Gilgun from Islington Trades Council says solidarity to all housing campaigners and link the struggles. Glenn Oliver, proud to see Southampton uni students on rent strike. So should we start with you, Anita? Local community housing groups mobilising to put pressure on Biden and local legislators, I guess you'd say, in America. Is that happening?
Yes, it is happening. And like I said, CASA belongs to a statewide campaign, which is Housing Justice for All, but we're also part of Homes Guarantee, which is a national campaign coalition working, and meeting with the Biden administration, the new people that are in place regarding housing. And on the local issues, on the local side, we are working with our members on the state level, pushing back on our electeds. And we are meeting with our electeds. We are holding town halls. We're organizing our buildings, and we're building tenant associations. We're working on forcing, we're also fighting back in the courts, blocking the courts, showing up at evictions, and we're doing a lot of lobbying with our electeds, doing phone banking, letter campaigns, and we're targeting the electeds at their homes and their offices, because we know that we have to build and we have to focus on the most urgent needs that our community are being faced with now, which is housing, and making sure that our government does not pass legislations or bills that does not help us in our current need. And because of COVID-19, we have to realize and understand that a lot of things was brought out into the light, and it's because of COVID-19 and because of it creating a harsh situation on the renters that are being faced with right now.
Thank you for that, Anita. I'm going to go to Sheena now. You've heard what's been said here today. Have you got any closing remarks for us?
It's just interesting because Anita I've never met before, but we say much the same thing. Having access to good, affordable public housing is key to having good health. So without one, you can't have the other. And like as access to education as well. So, the housing is going to be the founding block of that. Well, once you have that, the other things fall into place. But it's interesting, we're in all different areas and our battles are all the same and we want the same things. And people should have a right to proper housing without having to beg or wait years on housing lists. Here in Northern Ireland, we've almost 30,000 people waiting on the housing list and severe housing stress. And that is a crisis and that needs to be fixed. But I think a lot of the politicians rely on the general public or tenants to be apathetic about it. And that's something we as a movement combined, we can challenge and do something about to educate people and let them know what their rights could be or should be collectively if we do all get together, because we do all want the same thing and that's what we need. And people forget, by building public housing, it's going to stimulate the economy as well. It doesn't just belong to the private sector. We should all have a right to it, and we all have a stake in it. And that's what we need to do collectively, band together in order to get those things throughout the UK. And hopefully, Anita, if we can go to the States as well, we would love to do that. But there is a need for it, without a doubt.
Absolutely. International solidarity. Irene Henson said, solidarity with Ken Loach, a real socialist that brings housing and welfare to the forefront through his films and his talks. More for Izzy, solidarity. Izzy, you're spot on about how universities are run like properties. We've had that one. Niall Mulholland, great rent strikes by students across the country. My son is a first year at Swansea University in halls and helping lead the strike there. £40 million won back from central government to cover students in Wales' rent costs so far. It's a really significant victory there, Niall, and I hope your son can join Izzy in the workshop on student strikes tomorrow. Ruth Appleton talks about housing associations. They aren't affordable. This needs to be called out, as well as the poor services and sky-high service charges. Government is doing nothing to change this. Laws need to make renting fair. Absolutely. I mean, the state of regulation in this country in a whole number of different areas, including building safety, including rent control and so on, is terrible and actually set to get worse. We do seem to not be able to get John Glackin back. However, he is going to appear in a workshop tomorrow, and I'll talk about that later. So hopefully his internet will be able to get us, get us through to him tomorrow in the workshop at 11:30. Final comments from you, Izzy. There's been a lot there for you to react to.
Yeah, thanks for all the solidarity. Yeah, I think it's very clear that it's the same Tory government that's responsible for Grenfell and responsible for all these evictions and stuff. That is the government that brought students back onto campuses and stuff. And I would very much agree when someone said that all our kind of fights are linked. I would encourage people to come tomorrow to the conference. I don't have loads to sum up. I think it was all done very well, but I think the rent strike movement has been very promising, and it can very much show that we do have the power to withhold our rent when enough people do it. I think especially with students, a lot of students are paying for empty rooms if they're at home, which is what they've been told to do at the moment. And in cases like that, there really is no point paying, and I would encourage people, if you are a student or if you know a student in halls, to join the rent strike and withhold, because that's where it's going to hit the university the most, as universities are now run like businesses, would be in the profits. I'll leave it there, but thank you everyone.
Thanks, that's fantastic. And as I said, you'll be joined by some rent strikers tomorrow as well. So just to close on the Housing and Health Emergency Summit tomorrow, it will include 8 workshops and 2 plenary sessions, including Belle, Ribeiro, Addy and Matt Rack. Belle Ribeiro Addy is a Labour MP, and Matt Rack, the General Secretary of the FBU. There should be a link on in the comments for the Eventbrite event for that summit, and you will be able to get the Zoom link for the plenary and for the workshops if you sign up and register on Eventbrite. We've already got more than 250 people registered to attend the event. The summit starts at 10:30 and workshops start from 11:30. As I said, at 10:30, hopefully you'll get a chance to speak, maybe react to what you've heard tonight, raise your campaigning actions that you're doing in the plenary session at the beginning of tomorrow. So that's at 10:30, and then the workshops include, the workshops are fair benefits and universal credit, justice for Grenfell and safe homes for all, housing associations, tenants and workers united with fuel poverty action, changing the planning system for good and scrapping the developers charter, filling the empty homes. That's the one you should all go to. Requisition empty homes. John Glacking will be speaking in that, as will I. And I could big it up some more, but I'll leave you to make your decision tomorrow. Homelessness and fighting evictions is workshop number 6. Workshop number 7 is building the homes we need. And of course, building student rent strikes is workshop number 8. However, this is not the end of the story tonight, for tonight is film night, and as part of the summit we're running a special double bill of housing films with the documentary We're Still Here and the short film Revelations 20. This will be followed by question and answer session. The film showing starts at 8 o'clock. And the films can also be seen throughout the summit. If you do join the films at 8 o'clock, you can watch them and then go to the question and answer session, which starts at 10 o'clock. If you want links to the films and the Q&A, which starts at 10 tonight, please see the comments where hopefully the filmmakers have posted a link to sign up and get the Zoom links from Eventbrite. That's all I've got to say. Thank you so much to the panel. Thanks for your brilliant comments as well and your questions. And I really look forward to continuing the discussion and organising the action at the summit tomorrow. Thank you.